Developments in the war with Iran. 3 U.S. warships came under fire, according to the Pentagon.
Hit U.S. warship near Yask Island after it ignored Iran warnings.
Earlier, he threatened to continue bombing if Tehran didn't reopen the vital shipping channel, the Strait of Hormuz.
Strait of Hormuz. Northbound traffic lane, 26.56 degrees north, 56.25 degrees east. 5:14 in the morning. 3 Iranian fast skiffs close on a U.S. Navy destroyer. 1 American bridge team tracks them on radar, and both sides have less than 11 minutes to stop a local confrontation from becoming an international incident. The water in the Strait of Hormuz compresses distance and judgment at the same time. Tankers move in narrow lanes, rocky coastline rises in broken layers to the north, and the early light turns every wake into a visible line of approach. The destroyer pushes through confined water with its radars active, optical sensors elevated, and watch teams posted across the bridge, combat information center, and weather decks. The 3 skiffs ride low, fast, and deliberate, using civilian traffic, shoreline clutter, and speed to reduce reaction time. In this strait, nobody believes open water guarantees safety, and nobody mistakes proximity for accident. The U.S. destroyer carries the visual mass of a warship built for layered defense. Antennas crown the superstructure. Close-in defensive systems sit ready above steel decks washed by spray and heat. Lookout scan sectors through optics while the bridge tracks range, bearing, and relative motion. Below, in dark compartments filled with displays and control voices, operators classify contacts, compare patterns, and measure intent in seconds rather than minutes. Every console on the ship converts uncertainty into procedure. The Iranian skiffs project a different kind of pressure. Small hulls, high speed, hard turns, shallow draft, minimal signature. They do not need to match the destroyer's mass to challenge its space. They only need to force rapid decisions at close distance in congested water under global scrutiny. Their strength lies in ambiguity. Too small to ignore, too fast to dismiss, and close enough to make every maneuver look like a warning. The first skiff cuts across the destroyer's projected path and then parallels it at unstable distance. The second stays wider, offset to starboard, using the glare line on the water to blur shape and heading. The third lingers behind, then accelerates into view as if entering a rehearsed geometry. On the destroyer's displays, 3 small returns become a pattern. On the bridge, pattern becomes concern. In the Combat Information Center, concern becomes recorded timeline. A military documentary would not need dramatic music to explain the danger. The location does the work on its own. Nearly a fifth of the world's seaborne oil traffic transits this corridor, and every misread turn here scales upward fast. A warning shouted across water can alter markets. A misidentified movement can pull aircraft into the air, missile batteries onto alert, and governments into statements before sunrise. In this strip of sea, tactical contact and strategic consequence occupy the same frame. At 5:15, the destroyer's bridge issues the first bridge-to-bridge warning on maritime radio. The transmission states course, speed, collision risk, and intent to maintain safe passage. The nearest skiff answers with movement instead of words and tightens its angle off the destroyer's bow. The American watch team marks the change, repeats the warning, and orders additional visual recording from the bridge wing. The range closes, and the tone on board changes from observation to containment. 1 minute into the encounter, the destroyer sounds 5 short blasts on the whistle. The signal cuts through engine noise, sea wash, and radio chatter. The portside skiff veers away for a moment, then resumes a parallel track inside an unsafe margin. The destroyer holds discipline, preserves lane integrity, and avoids a hard maneuver that could endanger nearby merchant traffic. The skiffs test reaction, the warship tests restraint. At 5:17, lookouts report visible personnel shifts aboard the lead skiff. On the destroyer, the bridge relays the sighting to the Combat Information Center, and the commanding officer receives an updated assessment. The ship activates additional defensive postures without escalating to engagement. Sailors move with speed but without disorder, securing access points, verifying rules of engagement, and preparing non-lethal signaling options. The destroyer does not need noise to show readiness. Posture alone communicates consequence. 3 minutes into the encounter, the second skiff darts inward from the starboard side and forces the destroyer to evaluate simultaneous close contacts on both beams. Merchant traffic ahead constrains maneuver space. The bridge team calculates closest point of approach while visual teams record hull markings, crew count, and headings. The ship's crew understands the central fact: confined waters make every small craft appear larger than it is. Geometry becomes pressure. At 5:18, the destroyer deploys stronger visual warnings. Signal lamps flash. Loud hailer instructions carry over the water in clear, direct language. The lead skiff stays on line long enough to make the warning visible, then turns sharply across its own wake and falls back. The third skiff accelerates from the rear quarter and replaces the first at close range, proving coordination without requiring any radio intercept to confirm it. The maneuver is simple, visible, and deliberate. 4 minutes into the encounter, the American Combat Information Center classifies the pattern as coordinated harassment rather than random seamanship. That judgment does not authorize force. It authorizes tighter control, faster reporting, and less tolerance for ambiguity. The ship's officers update higher command through secure channels while the bridge continues collision warnings and measured maneuver language. The destroyer now fights the most important battle in such moments, the battle against premature interpretation. At 5:19, dawn light fully breaks across the strait and removes one layer of uncertainty while exposing another. Cameras capture sharper images. Crew on both sides can see posture, equipment, and body movement more clearly. The destroyer's forward sectors remain disciplined, no one crowding weapon stations for spectacle, no one turning readiness into provocation. The visual message stays controlled. Professional watchstanding, documented warnings, zero confusion. 5 minutes into the encounter, the nearest skiff crosses the destroyer's bow at a distance that leaves no margin for error. The bridge orders a measured reduction in speed to preserve sea room and avoid compounding the risk to commercial traffic. That reduction denies the skiff a collision narrative while preserving command of the situation. The second skiff attempts to exploit the slower relative closure by tightening its turn near the destroyer's starboard quarter. The crew tracks both without braking procedure. At 5:20, a U.S. helicopter detachment is placed on immediate alert but remains on deck. That decision matters. Launching aviation could widen the signal and raise the temperature across the entire area. Holding the aircraft shows confidence in the ship's own control while preserving one more option if the encounter expands. The destroyer chooses visible patience over immediate spectacle. 6 minutes into the encounter, the lead skiff breaks formation and angles briefly toward nearby commercial shipping. The move complicates the picture. The destroyer cannot allow itself to be displaced from safe passage, but it also cannot create new danger for civilian vessels by overreacting. On the bridge, officers balance legal navigation, force protection, and regional consequences in real time. The crew does not solve the encounter with aggression, it solves it with control. At 5:21, the destroyer transmits a final warning that includes explicit notification that the skiffs are operating unsafely and are being recorded. The language stays formal. The tone stays flat. The nearest skiff alters course just enough to signal receipt without admitting compliance. That slight movement gives the destroyer what it needs, evidence that the operators understand the warnings and are choosing their distance consciously. 7 minutes into the encounter, the geometry begins to change. The third skiff drops farther aft. The second widens by several boat lengths. The first remains forward but loses its sharp crossing angle and settles into a looser parallel track. On board the destroyer, nobody treats the shift as resolution. Crews in confined water learn to distrust early relief. At 5:22, the destroyer maintains course through the transit lane and refuses the temptation to chase space. That matters as much as any warning. The ship demonstrates that it will not be displaced from lawful movement and will not supply footage of panicked maneuvering. The bridge team continues to announce contact updates with precise bearings and ranges. Precision reduces fear. Fear increases mistakes. 8 minutes into the encounter, the Iranian formation degrades further. Whether by order, fuel limits, changing intent, or simple recognition that the destroyer will not offer a useful reaction, the skiffs lose the synchronized pressure they built at the start. The bridge records each separation. The Combat Information Center logs the transition from coordinated harassment to monitored withdrawal. The encounter has not ended, but its most dangerous phase has passed. At 5:23, one skiff turns north toward the Iranian coastline and throws a long white wake behind it. Another slows and drifts outward, using distance as a final statement rather than a retreat. The last remains briefly near the destroyer's forward quarter, then turns away on a broad arc that keeps its profile visible until the very end. The destroyer does not pursue. The destroyer documents. 9 minutes into the encounter, the ship systems continue full tracking until every contact opens to a safer range. Watch teams rotate only when ordered. No one on the destroyer mistakes departure for closure until the tactical picture says so. The officers aboard understand a recurring truth of maritime confrontation. The final minutes often matter more than the first because discipline tends to erode after visible danger recedes. This time, discipline holds. At 5:24, the commanding officer orders a measured step down from peak readiness while maintaining full surface surveillance through the remainder of the transit. Reports move upward through the chain. Logs preserve exact timings, radio language, visual evidence, and relative positions. By the time the horizon fully brightens, the encounter has become record, and record becomes policy material, intelligence reference, legal shield, and diplomatic instrument. Modern naval standoffs end twice, once on the water, and once in the paperwork that follows. 10 minutes into the encounter, the destroyer resumes the routine profile of transit without forgetting what just happened. Sailors return to normal movement in increments, not in a rush. Sensors remain watchful. Lookouts continue scans. The ship carries on because that is the central function of disciplined force in contested space, not dramatic victory, but uninterrupted mission execution under pressure. The Iranian side also leaves with a result. The Skiffs proved they could compress distance against a larger warship inside one of the world's most sensitive waterways. They showed how little space a major navy truly has in the Strait of Hormuz when civilian traffic, international law, and strategic consequence overlap. They demonstrated that small craft can force attention far beyond their size. They also showed the limits of such pressure when the opposing crew refuses confusion. The American side leaves with a different result. The destroyer did not need escalation to establish control. It translated warnings, restraint, and recorded procedure into tactical advantage. It avoided collision, avoided spectacle, preserved passage, and denied the Skiffs the image of disorder they were likely seeking. In modern maritime competition, that outcome counts as operational success whether or not a shot is fired. This fictional encounter illustrates the logic of gray zone confrontation more than open battle. The objective is not always destruction. Often it is interruption, message delivery, footage creation, reaction testing, and precedent shaping. Fast craft, radios, cameras, and constrained water can produce strategic effect without crossing the threshold into declared combat. That is why these incidents matter long after wakes disappear. A destroyer entering the Strait of Hormuz carries steel, radar, missiles, and doctrine. A cluster of skiffs carries speed, local familiarity, ambiguity, and political leverage. Neither side needs to fire for the balance of power to become visible. The confrontation itself becomes the message. The sea lane remains open, but the margin never returns to comfort. When historians study such moments, they do not only examine tonnage and armament. They examine seconds of hesitation, wording of warnings, spacing between hulls, chain of command discipline, and the decision not to convert risk into violence. Those details determine whether a tactical episode remains a maritime incident or becomes a regional crisis. In the Strait of Hormuz, professionalism is not public relations. It is a survival mechanism. The three skiffs eventually disappear into the broader traffic picture and coastal haze. The destroyer continues eastward, unchanged in silhouette and altered only in paperwork, fatigue, and memory. Nothing explodes. No boarding occurs. No objective is seized. Yet the encounter remains military in every serious sense because intent, readiness, and consequence were all present at close range. That is the cold reality of the strait. A small boat can force a warship into global headlines. A whistle blast can matter as much as a gun. A lawful transit can become a test case in less than 10 minutes. And every sailor on either side understands the same fact even if neither side says it aloud. Once distance collapses in confined water, professionalism becomes the last barrier between pressure and war.